Thanks so much for being here, all three of you, and congratulations. Each of you has projects in our episodic showcase this year. And I'd love to start by just asking a little bit about what draws you to this forum. You all are episodic heroes. What about it sort of attracts you as the container for your stories?
I mean, I think that when we find a story that we don't want to leave and we see the legs and we see many years we can get out of it, that's when we make the shift to the episodic. I think when Mark and I usually approach a story, it's pretty quick when we can see, is there an arc here we can get through in the sweet spot in 98 minutes that we love, or do we want to take this further?
I think for me, I am open to all the genres of film and the mediums and the lengths of time. I come from music video, and there was just a moment of feeling like I'm not digging as deep as I want to in this medium. I've done what I can. And I wanted to get into narrative storytelling. So it was very hard because there was a lot of like, can you work with actors? Do you know how to tell a narrative? And I was like, yes, I can. I could not, but but it takes time to learn and to train and to shadow and all the things. And episodic opened itself more easily to me. And then I was still like, I want to do features and I want to. And then suddenly limited series came along and I started working in that space and it was sort of best of both worlds. It was really beautiful stories, really top tier writers, and great actors suddenly became available. And then it was like, I love this space because I have time. I can really tell a story in a long time. I can collaborate with my other directors and like it's a thing that we do together. And then with pilots, it took it to another level, which was everything I always wanted, where I could take the skills I'd learned in music videos of world building and casting and putting it together the way that I saw it in my head, and and still do work that I was really passionate and excited about. So I'm really just open to whatever the universe brings along, and it's right now this.
Word. Episodic packaging, up to you.
All the things.
Yeah, my journey to episodic TV was like kind of unexpected because, I started here at Sundance like 21 years ago and I really identified as an independent filmmaker, And back then there was this lure, it was like you make a movie, it goes to Sundance, you sell it there, and then you enter the studio system and like you make movies with like Fox Searchlight and Focus Features, and like that was the run, and those were the things I wanted to do. And just as I was getting there, it was all sort of changing and dying out. Yeah. And I was like, oh shit, this is weird. What do we do now? And it happened to be the time of the birth of, this wonderful wave of new, interesting storytellers coming into episodic, So I'm a really pragmatic person, I wasn't like, I'm an indie filmmaker, I gotta hold on to this. It was like, HBO loves me and is begging me to come make a show. Like, I'm gonna do this. And I think I was a little naive about my narrative skills translating really well from feature filmmaking into episodic. And so when Jay and I started making our show Togetherness there, which was like 2013, we got a real education on what we didn't know about properly maintaining the dramatic structure of episodic narrative in particular, And it was awesome for us because we felt very confident as independent filmmakers telling 80 to 90-minute stories, as Mel said. And we kind of got our asses handed to us. And the executives there were, it was actually Casey Bloys was our executive who now runs the whole shebang. And he was really good at teaching us that stuff. And Jay and I technically wrote and directed every episode, but we got a little writer's room together of more seasoned TV writers who were very gentle and good with us to basically say, like, the flavor of what you're doing should still be Duplass Brothers, but you really need to learn this form a little bit more. And they helped us kind of crack the architecture of how it would work. And, the best thing anybody ever said to me was just like, when you are making a feature film, you are, taking the plane off, and then right around minute 60 or 70, you're just thinking about how am I going to land the plane. That's the ultimate goal. And TV is like juggling, and you want to get the balls up in the air, and you have to figure out how do I keep these balls up in the air in an interesting way, and just to keep them and sustain them up there. And that was like a kind of a mind crack for me.
Yeah, I'm curious if the rest of you could also speak to what you either didn't know or what you brought in from your prior work, whether it be in music video or, I know you guys collaborated on Biosphere last year. What translated for you from either feature filmmaking or from making music videos into the form, and what didn't?
I think the good things that I brought with me were, I think when you're doing music videos, you are selling style and taste.
Yeah.
So I came into it always looking for, like, how do I make this have a visual point of view and have a cinematic language that's interesting and that's cool.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's harder to teach that than to teach, like, coverage. Like what inserts you need to blah, blah, blah. And so that was a wonderful thing. What I needed to learn were things like when you are making a music video. I remember my first episode of anything, nobody entered or exited a room because I'm used to like they're just posed, and then I was in the edit like, oh, people have to come in the room. And nobody told me that on set. And luckily we had a good editor who worked it all out, but I felt like always thinking of, like, how do I make something in a cinematic language that reflects the interior world of the character, because that's what you're doing in videos, is telling the audience who this person is by what the thing looks like, was very helpful to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I feel like, when you go between the feature length to the episodic, one thing that always strikes me, kind of similar to what Mark was saying with the juggling, is that you're having to create a series and get to the end of a season and either make it so that it can be a great cliffhanger, but also maybe you're going to get canceled and this is the end. So it's always this weird way to find that middle ground so that you could be happy either way. And that's always been one thing. And then the other thing, I'm a big believer in jumping as, far into the action as you can in a film, but in TV, it's even more. And in that pilot, it's like as quickly as you can get off and running, the better. And, I think the other thing too is I always find that in episodic, there's more compromises, which I actually find really invigorating because, you'll go from, you have like a month or two for a movie, and then suddenly you have 3 to 4 days for an episodic and 3 days in the edit. So it's just about, I think what's been great is, especially for me as years of producing and kind of being that ghost director along with everybody, is honing in that skill of listening to your instinct, because then you get to TV and it's like you got to go and you just got to trust your instinct and trust the people around you.
Totally. You may have noticed we've been joined by another panelist. Welcome to the stage, Keyonna Taylor.
Yaha!
That's the Sundance surprise. You never know when those shuttles are going to work out. Here we are. Right. And I'm so glad you're here now, because just like you brought up, we've got 2 dynamic duos on stage. I'm curious if you could speak to a little bit about your creative collaborations, directorial and producerial. It feels like, that is really charged in the episodic space. Can you speak to how you two kind of work together as a team?
Well, for me, sorry I'm late, guys.
We get it.
It was my fault.
We get it.
For me, I was very new to this coming in. I came in at 2019, right? And I've been a teacher, a nanny. So this was all fresh. And then all of a sudden, I was a showrunner. And so that's a crazy story. But and
Put a pin in that.
And then working with Nzingha, honestly, I didn't know what to do, right? I was coming in, I wrote the episode, and I would just come sit in her office like, okay, what do we do? I started calling her captain, like, well, I did my part. Now you steer the ship. So I was calling her captain. So, but we worked well together. It was fun. I joke kind of and say I don't want to work with anybody else, but I know that doesn't happen. So.
I mean, for me and Mel, Mel is the president of Duplass Brothers, so obviously we have a long, rich history of collaborating together. And we've been discussing, over the past few years, Mel, as she mentioned, has been such a deep, integral part of the creative process. When is it time for her to really take the driver's seat and have her thing? And we made this movie Biosphere last year, which was a great example of that. Thank you. And then what happened with Penelope, which is our pilot that we have here, it was a show I started writing in the pandemic, and I was spending a lot of time just alone and, that wonderful time of existential panic. And I started writing this show about this young girl who sort of leaves her life behind and absconds to the woods for a different kind of life. And it was kind of based on this feeling that, like, we're all kind of not okay right now, and life just feels wrong and strange. I also have a 16-year-old daughter, so I was thinking a lot about that and the kinds of shows I would like her to see. Maybe something that is the way that life could be, as opposed to the way it is. And before I knew it, the normal process is write a pilot and try and go out and sell it. I had written 8 episodes because it was in the pandemic. And so I was like, all right, what do I do with this? So I called Mel, and she as well shares a deep love of nature and hope you don't mind me saying this, we have our own, like, mental health struggles that we deal with and think about these kinds of things a lot. What's wrong with the way we're living. And she came on and helped me rewrite these scripts, and something really interesting happened, which is that, like, we've come to this place in the industry where, like, normally when we go out with a project, there's, like, a lot of bidders that really want it. And we're like, yeah, here it comes the bidding war. And we brought out these 8 episodes with our vision of this show that was going to be slower paced, more meditative. And everybody was like, this is cool. Crank up the pacing a little bit and you might have something here. And something really new happened for us, which is that same instinct we've had in independent film for years, which is, let's go make this on our own to protect the creative vision of the project, came right into TV for us. And we were like, the only way we're going to be able to make this the way we want to do it is if we risk kind of everything. So we looked each other in the eyes and we're like, knew what we were going to say before we even said it. And it was like, we're going to make 8 episodes of television completely on our own, and we just fucking emptied the bank account. And then I was like, this is so great. And by the way, Mel, you're going to direct all of them. So
yeah, it was a lot. I don't really recommend being the showrunner and director of all 8 episodes and doing everything. No, I mean, it's amazing because Mark couldn't be there for the shoot, but we have such a deep understanding and of creatively we're in tune, but we also know where we differ and are able to have those conversations. And I think a lot of the time, it was me just calling to gut check him on things, but at a certain point he's like, oh dude, you know Penelope now better than maybe me, and you and Megan the actress, are off and running. And so it was amazing because I think Mark has such trust in me and I am so protective of him and his creative vision, so it just felt right to be able to collaborate and complete the whole season 1 together. And also we couldn't afford anybody else. So I would work for free.
That's indie filmmaking, yeah. And I gotta ask now, how did you meet each other? What is the crazy story?
Us?
No, Nzingha and Keyonna.
We just met.
Yeah.
You and your we met on stage at Sundance. That's right.
One of our producers, Jackie Cohn, loved Nzingha, and I was familiar with her work, and my girls love tall girls. I love little fires everywhere from scratch, and I'm like, this lady, she'll do it? Like, I was kind of, on the fan side. So Jackie put us together, and she showed us, like, just elevated the words so well. And I'm like, yeah, please, this lady, yes.
Yeah, how did you guys sort of establish your working relationship, your collaboration on the project?
It really, it was almost a blessing that Keyonna came to this as a first-time showrunner, because there wasn't the sort of the feeling of I'm a director for hire. Even sometimes when I'm doing a pilot, it was, which this was, it was a true collaboration. And I wanted to support, she had already written something so beautiful. I wasn't going to come in and tell her what's what. I felt like, how can we work together to make this the best, most beautiful honoring of a life that we can? because it was based on a real person, and the goal was always the thing that we stayed focused on. It was never, I want to do this thing, but she wants me to do this thing. It was always like, how do we best honor this young woman whose story we're telling who's no longer here? And that being our North Star, I think was the best way to start the collaboration. It was never about anything else, and sort of taught me going forward to always agree on that with your showrunner, even at the point of accepting the job. Like, what is your North Star? Here's mine. Do those things fall in sync? Because there's times sometimes where, like, you disagree. That always helps you to not make it personal, to just be like, wait, what story are we telling? What's the vision? Let's go back to that. So, but for us, it was a beautiful experience. She just sat in my office while I was shot listing, while I was doing things, and then I would just look up and be like, what about this? And she'd be like, yep, and I'd go back to doing whatever. It was a beautiful experience.
Totally. And on this note of your creative North Stars, and also about the ability to keep your creative vision through, making these purely independent projects, can you speak a little bit to where you think we are in this moment? I liked what you were saying, Mark, about the state of affairs and how Sundance plays into these sorts of things. What makes you want to continue working in the space of truly independent episodic, and what kind of potential do you see there for the next wave of storytellers?
Well, there's a lot less fingerprints on it. It was really me and Keyonna locking arms. We did have a producer, Rob McElhenney, who you might know from It's Always Sunny and Wrexham and all the things. And Rob was like, I am not, as a white guy, going to show up on set and tell you two black women about systemic racism. So,
But I kind of want to see the show about Rob McElhenney doing that. And I think we need to start working on that right now.
Rob deals with racism. And so we were sort of left to our own devices. I was allowed to, it was a lot of favor asking. So I was allowed to bring in the team that I wanted without the usual vetting process and like they want this person and that. So there was a lot of freedom in it, but there was a lot of like, how are we going to shoot a musical in 6 days where the number one on the call sheet is a minor? And so we only have 6 hours of shooting every day and 5 dance numbers and story in between. Like, there is that too that happens, but because all the people aren't there interfering, it helps you get it done. And so I loved it.
I love hearing that you actually appreciated that process and see the benefits of the thinner lane of how to make things, because I think that like we can always get caught up in this sort of scarcity mindset of like, oh, I'm only able to do 60% of what I want to do because I'm limited in resources. And I think there really is a mindset of just like, how can we create a sense of abundance in independent storytelling? And I think that that's something that Mel and I have focused a lot on, is like, if you're going to make independent television or even independent film, I find it very difficult to take a movie that should be made for X amount of dollars and then go ahead and make it for half of X amount of dollars. You will just be in that sort of scarcity mindset. It's very difficult, But if you can craft a story that is sort of siloed in some way, or a chamber piece in some way, and even your story, there's a lot of it that, although it feels big because of the musical numbers, I can see from a production standpoint, we're in the house, we're on the streets, a little bit of school during summer when it's easy to shoot there. Like you did a good job designing that thing so that you guys could really like do it at the right price. And I think it's going to become, just to let me have my Norma Ray moment for a second, it's going to become more important than ever in the coming years, because the streamer system is not going to be sustainable. They're losing subscribers. They're folding into each other. What happened in the music business 25 years ago, what happened in the independent film structure business 10 years ago, it's happening in television right now. And we've learned in film to turn to an alternative, because if we don't, these stories they're just going to die. And I think that it's not only important to tell these stories so that we can put systemic racism first and foremost, so we can put the story of like, what is going on with us in our mental health that makes us need to run off into the woods and connect with something deeper, that the streamers, they're just not going to make those based on a pitch anymore. And that's upsetting, but it's also okay because we're going to find another way. And I think that what Mel and I are starting to discover is that, like, it's not the worst thing in the world to have to go make this thing this way, to find some outside money, to try and build up really a whole new ecosystem, the way that independent film was built through Sundance in the late 90s. And I think we can do that in TV. And I think it's time we have to really start looking at it.
Yeah, and I think, we're, like Mark said, we really work to back into it as opposed to start with the story and then go, now how do we get it down? We've just learned it's so much better to, like, okay, we've got this one location, or we've got these 2 actors and this one room, and then we kind of back into that and find a story there. But I think also in TV, something amazing that Mark and I did that I thought was wonderful, just to be able to push the diversity of stories and talent that we worked with, was our HBO show, Room 104, where, Mark had this idea where he's like, one motel room, that is the set we build. And then now we're going to use this as the opportunity to go to all of our friends who have directed their indie films at Sundance and be like, do you want your first chance at episodic TV? And so it was a way for us, each person got their own kind of mini short film, but it got to go on HBO. And I always found that when we gave people the parameters of, like, you've got one room, 3 days, it, like, the best creatives, when, given those parameters, they're going to push them and come up with something even better than if you just say, come up with anything, no limits.
Totally. I'm curious, as the landscape is sort of shifting, what do each of you sort of view as the way that you evaluate the success of a project like this?
Ooh, that's hard.
That one was an easy one for us.
Yeah.
Because it was based on a real person, and the other night when I'm getting emotional thinking about it. The other night when her family was there at the screening, they sent Keyonna this beautiful email afterwards saying every time they think of Yeye, which was her name, they think of her death. And now they think of it in a different way. They think of it as a celebration, and they think of all that she still continues to give them. And this is an experience coming from the south side of Chicago they would not ever have had. And so making them feel like we honored her in the right way was like, then we did it. Success.
Hands down. Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say, was the text message I got. And she said it was like healing for her to see it like that. And she'll think of she won't be thinking about the death next time. And her short life was beautiful. And that's what I wanted. So, I mean, yes, I do want other people to see it. I do want to tell some of the thousands of other stories there are to tell. But for this time, that was it. That was good.
Well, congrats on a job well done. How about you two? It's a tough act to follow. We can talk a little business now, yeah.
I mean, it is, we had the premiere of both of our pilots the other night, and, I had this little girl come up to me who was like, I came here because my name's Penelope, and I didn't know what this was about, and just like the look on her face. I mean, I started crying because she was just like, I feel seen. Like, here's this young person who felt seen and came knowing nothing, and I could even see her little sister like being like, what was that I just saw? And this idea of like throwing technology away and running into the woods and connecting with nature at a young age. So those are always the most meaningful. But I think also Mark and I are like the heart, like we have these hearts and like these artists that are like, that's the success, and then we're also like, oh my God, and how do we keep this sustainable?
Yeah.
So it's always that battle of, which is I think why we always gravitate towards how can we make the yes easier so we can keep going and doing what we love, like Room 104, for example.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know if it's healthy, but like I think that like Mel and I have developed this like somewhat of a feeling of responsibility that did come out of Room 104, where that it was kind of this incredible thing where we were able to give filmmakers a shot who would never get a shot at directing TV, and we had these wonderful rules where it was like, we're going to have at least half female directors and this many persons of color, and we set this grid, and we were able to fulfill it. And the reason we were able to do that is because, not to get too in the weeds, but I think it's important to understand the business of this stuff. Yep. Like, we didn't go to HBO and say, you need to pay us what you normally pay for these shows. We went to them and said, we're going to make this really cheap and a really easy yes for you, and this is going to be this exciting small show that may or may not hit, but it'll be well reviewed, and you're going to be part of a new wave of storytellers that don't often get their shot. And that was enough for them. And I think we got to make 4 seasons of that show at a time when the ratings were like kind of middling, you know? Like, and if we had been expensive, we would have been canceled after the first season. So being mindful of the whole ecosystem and thinking, you know what, we actually want to design this and price this at a point where the yes is a little easier for them. And we sort of feel a responsibility to kind of like pave that path a little bit if we can.
Totally, and it's connected to this question about sustainability. I'm curious what you see as sort of the major challenges in the field to that right now, and some possible solutions if you have them. We'll fix it here today, so just make a note. Yeah.
We have 7 minutes, so let's get going. Yeah.
I'm just curious what you think of what you see as sort of the biggest challenges of making these kinds of projects sustainable ones for you as creators, and what solutions you might see in the business moving forward.
I think, first of all, I am not as much as a business person as I should be. I really just think about, like, what do I want to do next creatively, and hopefully there'll be a space opened up for it. I think the challenges are different when you are a person of color. So the challenge is, like, can you trust this will work even if you don't find your way in? I have had to think about my career in ways that sometimes make me sad, which is like, I always want to be doing things with people of color, but sometimes I have to do, and I've been grateful, really mainstream projects so that they can say, well, I don't get this, but like she did Daisy Jones and the Six, and she did Little Fires Everywhere, so like, well, I'll trust her to do this project with people of color because at least there's some way I can conceive of her talent. I have a metric to judge it by. So hopefully conversations like this happen more in a business room where it happens kind of place, where we're just trusted more. Like it just is a different uphill battle for us.
100%.
Yeah, I think, you know, to add to that, I think one of the challenges that we're all going to be facing is that, you know, as these companies who were so instrumental in building this era of peak TV where a lot of wonderful things were made, you know, they stretched themselves financially in this war to be the #1 streamer, and they went into debt, and they're all terrified now. So they're all pulling back, and I understand it. Look, I get there's a business part of this that I do understand, but it's going to provide a challenge because I think that the focus that they're going to have, and it comes from their board up top, you know, is get me those big key marquee shows that stop me from bleeding subscribers, and that makes them focus on big old content IP. Like, that's why Amazon goes in on Lord of the Rings. They're just like, well, I don't want to make 100 little shows, you know, like Penelope and MeWe. Let's just take all that money and go all in on Lord of the Rings and stop the bleeding, you know? And it's our challenge and our responsibility is, and I truly believe this, is like nobody knows anything. Yeah. That show flopped. Yeah. You cannot guarantee that the people are coming. And while you're thinking about doing this stuff, weirdly, this small Korean show that you licensed for no money became a massive hit. So we need to like truly ingest that, like in this age where we're all thrift shopping through a glut of content, like it's possible that MeWe is exactly what everybody wants, more so than Lord of the Rings.
We think so, yeah.
Yes, and so we just have to feel confident in that, and we cannot let this contraction that is going to be temporary stop us. And I know that's easy to say for someone who's been in this industry for so long, and I feel blessed that Mel and I have a company that has a deal that floats us a little bit. But because we do have that privilege, like we feel that responsibility. We have to stay on this, you know.
Yeah, but it really is like what we bump up against is everybody looking back rather than forward. So like, how can we make that like, oh, this is the next this or that, you know? And I think that was a challenge we had with Penelope is we were looking ahead going, we're feeling this thing. We don't know how to describe our feeling. And now we want to put that through the eyes of a teenage girl. And, you know, at the same time, we saw this article in the New York Times about these Luddite teen communities where all these teens are starting to throw away their cell phones. They go into the woods, they like touch grass, they read books. And, you know, we were like, oh, that's what we're feeling. Like, we want that, you know? And we're like, nobody's talking about that. And so when we started bringing that to people, you know, we did feel a little like, oh, they're not there yet to like be able to comprehend.
You guys aren't
or
into
talk.
the Norwegian slow TV movement? You're not feeling
please.
this?
Oh, please.
Give us all the money.
Yeah, but all the more why we were like, we have to find a way to be able to just make this ourselves,
Right.
and again, like be really mindful of the costs and you know, compromise a little bit, but know when to, you know, what hills to die on, and again to like make that yes easier when we bring it back with a fully done season.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like that really connects to a sense of knowing your audiences, you know, being confident that this is going to speak to a certain kind of person or a broad swath of people. Can you talk a little bit about how much that informs your process, you know, as you're executing, you know, keeping your audience in mind, and then how much time you're spending trying to make sure that these things can find the right audiences?
No matter what kind of show it is, I have learned to not think about the audience. I can't. I don't know. I can't guess how someone's going to receive it. I can guarantee somebody won't like it. I'm positive. But I can't guess why. And I can guarantee somebody will like it because I love it. You know what I mean? And there's just things that we have in common as humans. And I get too in my head if I think that way. I have to just say, how do I love this more? What would make me love this scene more? What would make me love this show more? And then talk to the showrunner and sometimes fight with the studio and say, I hear you, but I'm the one who has to execute it. Yeah. And if I don't love it, if I don't believe this, that scene is going to get cut and we just wasted some time because I just don't know what to say to actors or, you know what I mean? Yeah. And a lot of times, like if I hear from an executive, like a note that they can't articulate well, I just ignore it. Yeah. It just goes someplace else. And, you know, but fight for the things that are important to me and the things that I love and anything that's like, and here's the thing, when you ask about audiences, because I've been working a lot in that limited series space, there are times when I hear this stuff about algorithms, and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck you are saying. Like, I don't. I feel like, well, the first 7 minutes has to do da-da-da-da-da and be at this pace and da-da-da-da. And I feel like storytelling is storytelling. If I sit down and I think, that seems like an interesting person, this looks interesting to me, it makes me ask a question like, well, where are they going? Well, why did that happen? The more I ask questions, the more involved I am. Like, can we think about it like that instead of like, well, the algorithm shows that at minute whatever, like, audiences are people. And like, we've been doing this since we sat around a fire. Like, just tell stories you love to tell. And like, that's the only way I have to ignore everything else.
Yeah, and I think good storytellers, you have that rhythm in you, and you know the story better than anybody. So I think you are always the authority on it. And I think you have to learn when is it, especially like with a studio, when is it someone just trying to prove that they're a part of this and have something to add, you know, as opposed to a true note, you know. And then, yeah, the algorithms, you get into all that. I mean, one thing I will say, though, is it is hard for me not to think about the audience because I am always thinking about sustainability because I'm always afraid, like, tomorrow they're going to kick me out of this whole thing somehow. So I'm always, you know, and I think it's not, you know, like the studio system that we look towards, like Mark and I are really big believers in, like you said, going out to the human beings. So when we make something, a huge part of our process is feedback, and that's talking with people we know, bringing it to other collaborators, you know, people who aren't even in the industry, and just having conversations and hearing their thoughts and allowing it to be sort of this communal experience of where we land. And ultimately at day's end, the creative leads, whether that's Mark or I or both of us, we're going to make the final call because we'll know what feels right. But I find it really exciting to just involve as many voices in the process.
For me, we I was just thinking about the family first, just because of the story that we were telling. I wasn't really thinking about the audience, even though we need the audience. I just wanted them to be happy, and I guess it was a little bit of magical thinking and thinking that, oh, if people understand what we're trying to do and it's coming from a pure place, everybody's gonna love it, right?
Yes.
Of course people will wanna watch this. So we'll see.
But that is happening.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I love all these different ways of thinking. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. You know, I think that like I've honestly had like two different journeys. One where I was like more of a writer director through my 20s and 30s. I sort of accidentally became a producer because Jay and I were the first people in our group of friends who made any money, and everybody was like, "Will you give me some money for your movies?" And we're like, "Sure." And then we were giving them money and lending them cameras and advising on their cuts. And then like one day, I think it was Anthony Bregman was like, "You know you're a producer now." And I was like, "Really? I thought I was just being a friend."
Terrible news.
And as I've become a producer, I've sort of learned to embrace what this business is in a way that I hope can coexist with the creative side of myself and try to let my left and my right brain work together. I don't know what compromises I might be making subconsciously in doing it, but I know it has led to some sustainability, and I sort of embrace it. And I look at things like baking in things from the beginning of the project, from the DNA of the project, that can be helpful. Like, I remember when we made this documentary series, The Lady in the Dale, for HBO, it was interesting because we were telling the story of, early trans women in the auto industry and their fight. But at the same time, like, we were making a show about cars. And a bunch of dudes who really aren't interested in trans historical content showed up to see some cool car shit.
Yeah.
And we embraced the fact that like this was going to do good work and would not be siloed into just a New York and LA show that was preaching to a vacuum that already believed everything we believed, So those kind of elemental things I really do like to think about from the front end. And then maybe as the thing starts to progress, I start to drift a little bit more into my creative side once it's like foundationally solid.
So well said. I mean, we obviously believe in sort of the translation of humanity that's possible through these projects, especially when they keep those creative hearts. But I'm glad you brought up the Lady in the Dale, and obviously with MeWe, we've been talking about this kind of line between the fiction and the true stories that you're telling. How do you guys sort of negotiate that relationship in your careers? Do you lean towards one or the other that you're more interested in, and do you feel pressure to move towards fiction or nonfiction to continue operating in the episodic space?
I mean, it's definitely, I feel the pressure to do more doc series because those are so popular and everybody wants them and they loved Wild Wild Country. I think my heart's always in narrative.
Premiered here at Sundance, yeah.
Yes, another Sundance. But, it's what I love about docs is you find like these amazing filmmakers who have been obsessed with something for 7 years, and you sort of get to be this new, fresh voice that comes in and helps them kind of pull the narrative out of the real experience. And, we did that with The Lady in the Dale and one that was just announced yesterday. So I think that's really fulfilling. But I think Mark and I and Jay all love it all, so we just try and have like let's make sure we always have our special doc series going, and then we'll go make our passion project narratives.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that like there's something logistically great about documentaries, which is that they tend to be inherently a little bit more cheaper to get started and going. Particularly follow docs where it's just one filmmaker really like finding this story and tracking it. As that relates to the indie TV thing we're talking about, we've actually had quite a bit of success making documentary series independently before we even branched into that idea of doing it narratively, and that helped us sort of bridge that idea of like, well, maybe we can do it like this, and we're still doing it to this day. Our big Tony Hawk documentary that we took out, like, we don't say this a lot publicly, but like, we had exclusive access to Tony Hawk and like Sam Jones, who, you know, did the great Wilco documentary, I'm Trying to Break Your Heart. And we had the pitch, and we were just like, wait till everybody bids on this. We got one incredibly lowball offer. And we were like, what is happening here? And so we just went and made the thing and sold it back to them for 10 times what they offered the first time around. And we did the same thing with, we had a series called Last Stop Larimar that's about this really interesting, strange little murder mystery in a small town in Australia. It's only 11 people and one goes missing. So it's almost like this natural Agatha Christie thing that happened in a town full of people who are truly Christopher Guest characters. And again, you know, took it around and pitched it, nobody would buy, but we were able to make that independently. So that's to say, like, it's an inherently kind of easier space to invest in because it tends to be a little bit cheaper up front. But what I'm loving right now, even though it sounds a little depressing, is like, it used to be like, oh, narratives are working, so let's focus on that. And documentaries don't make any money, and so people would. And then documentaries surged for a little bit. Now it's all bad. So now it's just like, just follow your gut and follow your heart and follow your instincts. Totally. And like to your point, just like no one knows from an algorithmic point of view what's going to work. So we've just been reduced to, great, I don't have to think about that as much. Let me just follow my heart.
Yeah. And talk to me a little bit about how you kind of pitched this project and how you put it together and where you sort of see why you chose this approach to fictionalize a true story rather than go somewhere that was pure nonfiction.
Yeah, we wanted to, I didn't want to say, well, let me see. We want the stories to be fun. Not saying the documentaries aren't fun, but
there's some challenges.
They're not really.
There's a
I
point
was
there.
struggling with how to say that.
You could be easily profiled if you're making a documentary about systemic racism
Right.
that
Yeah.
starts, you know, each episode is about someone who's passed. Like, I think that's fair to say that.
Nobody really, like, we're numb to that right now. We're scrolling past these stories that are like that. So that's why I want to tell, like, the stories about the person and who they were and celebrate their lives. These are still true stories. We had, of course, fictionalize it a little bit to fit it all in. But we just want it to be fun and like a musical for Yay. It's genre fluid because it goes off of the essence of whoever the person was, the story that we're telling. The next one is a thriller, a wartime thriller about a man when he served in the Gulf War, right? So they're all wildly different, and it's just speaking to the essence of the person. So, yeah, I don't think a doc will work for this.
Yeah, no, totally. I think we have some time for some audience questions if anyone out there has some questions they'd like to ask of our panelists. Yeah, right here in front.
Hi.
There's a mic on the way.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I saw both your pilots were amazing, but as far as like manifesting it out here, where do you ideally see them living, or like where would your ideal spot for them be on TV?
I think we may have different ones. For me, I would love to see this. I would love to see this on something like an HBO who won't try to change it into, like, let's reshoot it, but let's put all these famous people in it, and let's, you know, and I'm just using them as a space holder. You know what I mean? Really any place that will let us tell the stories Keyonna wants to tell with people who are right for it. This was a completely unknown cast. Most of our cast had never acted before. You know, I just don't want it to go someplace that, like, now we have to get famous people to do the next ones. And, you know, it lets it be the sort of raw, intimate thing that it wants to be.
Yeah, I just want a safe home for it, somebody who will take care of the vision and not try to change it too much. I am flexible.
If there's
I'm
anyone
a pleasure
here today,
to work with.
In case any of you homes are listening right now, want you to know that we're passionate but totally open.
I mean, we felt the same way. I think that's why we went to go make it, because we're like, we feel safe knowing we can just make all 8 and not have to make the pilot and then have somebody come in and be like, you need somebody more famous, you know?
I mean, yeah, I feel like HBO, to your point, they're a beautiful place, you know, but we've also learned through the years that, like, sometimes these new places that people question because they're not set up yet. I mean, I remember when we announced our first 4-movie deal with Netflix very early on, like, a lot of filmmakers were like, dude, what are you're selling to, like, this DVD distribution company and you're giving up your theatrical. And I was like, yeah, but they feel really, really passionate. They're going to try to make their name on us. I'm going to get their energy and their big push. And that ended up being really valuable. I saw it happen with Transparent that my brother was in, that was on Amazon. Everybody's like, you're going to do a show at the grocery store? Like, what are we doing here, you know?
Yeah.
And it works. So, like, that sometimes that questionable platform that has that passion is willing to make their name on you can be really exciting. So I'm open.
Yes, and hopefully playing in the Sundance Episodic Showcase might make a connection like that. We hope.
Yes.
We hope. Anyone else out there? In the sweater in the front. This left-handed sweater, and then we'll move to the right-handed sweater.
This question is actually for Keyonna, because you blew past this wonderful moment when you introduced yourself that I think was so, you talked about, you know, you were something else and then a nanny, and then you kind of went into writing this, but
Teacher.
for somebody, teacher. Yeah. For somebody who's like funding their stuff working at a coffee shop, I just love to hear more about that. And what was the moment that you started writing this, that pivoted into that, and that gave you the drive?
Okay, I'm gonna try to get through it without crying.
You don't have to.
So my aunt died from a form of systemic racism, and that was my hero. And at the time, I was teaching in a classroom, and that's what one of the people in the hospital where she passed. He said to me, "If I would have known who she was, I would have treated her better." And that's after I explained to him, like, who she was to me, who she was in our family, and it was that, him saying that made me be like, when I'm in the classroom, like a couple days later, I'm like, but wait, there was something in that he said. Like, what if they knew who Trayvon Martin was? Like, that he wasn't some bad guy in a hoodie or whatever. Maybe he would have been treated better, right? So then I go and I start looking up these people who this has happened to, and I'm like, hey, I want to tell your story. I didn't know how I was gonna do it at the time. I started talking to these families, building I've been friends with some of these people for like 6 years. And so I really know their families intimately, and I just was a teacher at the right school at the right time, and Rob McElhaney's kid was in my class. And there was an assembly held, and sometimes a teacher gets to come up and talk, and I was the teacher who got to come up and talk this year in 2019, and I said, because you talk about your passions and all this, your hobbies or whatever, in these assemblies, and I said I wrote comedy. And then when everybody cleared out, there was Rob. And so he gave me my first shot in the Mythic Quest room, and then I gave him this project at the right time, and now I'm on stage on the panel for the first time.
Hell yeah. Great question. Left-handed sweater, very well done. Now right-handed sweater. Please.
Thank you. So my question is kind of to Mark and to Nzingha. You both talked about the studio not understanding the audience. And as an audience, and I agree with you that everything is changing. The landscape has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And one of the things that's changed is the studios no longer understands the audience. And I think a lot of that has to do with the whole algorithm thing that you're talking about in Nzingha, where they don't understand this whole concept of the algorithm themselves. They think it's about social media interaction. And like Amazon had a show called Riches, which would be considered prestige TV, and they canceled it after one season. So can you talk about your perspectives as showrunners and directors and about getting the studio back to the point of where they start to really understand the audience again, because I don't think the industry understands who they're making shows for anymore.
I think the person with the most conviction wins. And a lot of times there's a lot of fear, and I get it. If you are afraid you'll lose your job if this isn't a hit, you might think, well, this didn't work last time, even though it's a slightly different thing, different crew, or this did work, so we have to do this exact same thing. And I feel like conviction is like rock, paper, scissors. Like, conviction is, fear is this, and conviction is this. And so a lot of times I will say, just as forcefully as possible. Sometimes I am strong and wrong, but let me say that. And then I'm like, oh, that was totally crazy. I have this other great idea. Here's what we're gonna do now. But I do think if you can get fear out of the room, and sometimes it's not conviction like you're wrong, I'm right. It's like really knowing you're talking to a human being. And like, what are you afraid of? What do you think could go wrong? And like, let me think about that, letting them feel heard. And then being like, I hear you, but I know this is a true thing. Every part of me knows that this works. Sometimes you get a win because you've just taken fear out of the room, and now we can talk about the project. They'll still have good notes. They'll still have things that are worth hearing. It just, once it's coming from a place of fear, I don't want that to infect me, and I know we're not going to get anywhere. Like, you have to get that out of the way first.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the fear, and I think that, you know, one thing that a lot of people don't often think about is that these projects are being controlled by some of the middle level executives because there's so much going on, and they are operating under strict directives from someone at the top who is following the algorithm, right? And so they themselves, those executives, feel a little handcuffed. They might actually love this story, but they feel like they're following these directives, and because things are shrinking, they know that people are losing their jobs left and right, so they're just so afraid they need to follow the directive. Here's the good news in that, is what I believe. I'm an optimist. I believe the algorithm is ultimately going to be our friend, because what the algorithm is telling us right now is this project was successful, do something derivative to that project so it will be successful, and those actually aren't working. So the algorithm is eventually going to break down to a place where there's nothing to be figured out from a numbers standpoint, that the heart can't be known, to my previous point of what is going to break through. So then chaos is going to be laid out, and then in the middle of that chaos, all you're going to be left with is like, we really don't have the ability to predict what audiences want, so all we can do is put ourselves in that place and say, what would I want to see? What's touching my heart right now? And I think that is going to emerge as all we can rely on at a certain point. But I think we're going to hit some nasty patches before that happens.
Yes, let chaos reign. We're very close. Yeah, in the back, in the brown shirt.
I am in film school and writing.
One sec. Mike's on the way.
All good. I'm currently trying to write a series, and I was just curious, when it comes to coming up with ideas, do you think that, or how do you determine whether it's better as a series versus like a feature, for instance? What are some tips for that?
I mean, it can be very difficult, and it can be arbitrary, you know? But I would just say, in general, like, there's like the series, there's the limited series, and there's the feature, you know? What I would highly recommend is, if you're in film school, you have access to your friends who will help working with you, you have access to camera equipment and whatnot, is I would start workshopping like the 2 to 3 minute scenes themselves and start shooting them, and then your first one's probably not gonna be great if you're anything like me, and then you take it, and you fix it, and you put it back up, and then inside of that microcosm, you're probably going to learn a lot about what does this thing ask me to be, as opposed to me trying to tell it what it wants to be. And I think simultaneously, from a pragmatic standpoint, you know, once you have that feature or series, you know, written, whether it's the half-hour or the hour-long pilot or the script, I still think it's a great idea to take the best scene from that while you're in film school. Make that scene really, really well. If you got to shoot it 10 times and rewrite it, just nail that scene as a microcosm, and that can help you then come to film festivals and use that as proof of concept for your thing to ideally get a little bit of support and cash to make your thing.
Anything to add? It's very pragmatic advice.
I mean, everything Mark said. We're such big fans, and go make something, because it's through the process. Like film school is awesome, but use it just to take advantage of all the free stuff and people, and go make things. So that's where you're going to learn the most. And I think every time we get sent a lot, and our team has gotten pretty good at like knowing right away, like. We read something, we're like, oh, this would be better as a feature. And I'm not sure I can put my finger on why, but I mean, it's just you get a sense if something has legs or not. And if, there's more to go, or if you can see a pretty clear arc and there's not a lot of offshoots from that, then we kind of stick with a film. Or if it's that, but it's really robust, and we're like, this is going to be too packed in, and we don't want to make a 2.5-hour movie. No offense to those.
Please, no.
Then we're like, okay, that's a limited. So but again, I think you're not going to find it until it's such a great way to go make something and start to feel it out and see what comes to you.
Yeah, I don't want to hog that. Oh, sorry, you go ahead. No, you go.
Just real quick, I don't have the experience that these guys have, but I think for me it's characters. Like, do I have characters that people will want to come back and see year after year? Or is this just like a character that is going to go through a journey one time and an asshole nobody else wants to see again, So that's how I rule it.
Yeah, I was just going to say something that I remembered that I wanted to share is that, a lot of the executives that we know find that 99% of what they are pitched as TV shows are really things that should be movies, but people are pitching them as TV because they just feel like there's more money in TV and they kind of like convince themselves that it should be there because it's like a better form and will bring them more money through the years. So I think that that's just something to watch out for, is like a blind spot that a lot of people are experiencing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Probably time for one or two more. I meant this brown shirt in the back here. Yes. You.
It's green, actually.
It's mountain
Good
sheep.
note. Good note.
I got a question for Mel and for Mark. Mark, you were talking about Room 104 and going to HBO and saying instead of making it for super expensively, we can make it a little cheaper. What were the cuts that you would have to make financially? Is that the Duplass brothers company would take less of a profit margin? Is that you'd be paying people at scale? Can you expand a little bit more on that?
It's such a great question, and we could talk forever, but I'm gonna keep it short. We didn't want to have to ask our crew members to work for less, and if it were a show that needed 6 days per episode to shoot, we would have had to do that at the budget level we asked for. We scaled everything down to a place where it could be sustainable at each level. HBO is happy because they're only paying a portion of what they're used to making it for. We're happy because we've designed it that it can be successfully made. Most episodes shoot for between 2 and 3 days on Room 104, and so we don't need as much money to make it, right? And then simultaneously, like, we get to own the show because we're making it so cheaply. So we don't make a lot of money up front, but then once that license period is up, we get to relicense the show, and then we take a lot of that profit share and we create pools for every actor, every director, every writer that was on set. And then later on, while they're like, in the pandemic or they're in the strike, they get these like wonderful checks that come in the mail. So it's been a beautiful system, but it all started with not taking a show that was expensive and just jamming it into the cheap box. We reverse engineered ourselves into the box with a show that could have abundance because it was so such a chamber piece.
Everything Mark said, and I think one thing that we were able to do with Room 104, again, to try and bring new talent into TV, was rather than go pay big bucks for another established TV writer, we internally, Mark wrote, I would say, majority of the episodes and was able to bring it then, so we're not making any money up front, and we could commit to that, and then kind of give back to these rising talents and get them in on TV, and them to be able to come in, like get paid reasonably well, but take that first step in and maybe not make the big bucks right away, but then residuals, which we all know are very important, ultimately will pay off for them. So I think it is a little bit of like an investment of yourself up front if you really believe in the show.
Absolutely. Could we have time for one more? The pressure is on. It should be good and it should be short. Right here in the hat and the shirt that I'm not sure what color it is because it kind of looks green and brown.
It is green.
Cool.
This is for the Penelope team. I'm curious, were there any changes to the story on set that kind of impacted the rest of the season? And if so, how did you guys kind of navigate that?
Well, I don't want to give plot spoilers away. I mean, the big thing with Penelope is we shot 8 episodes, half hours, all in the middle of the Pacific Northwest woods, largely. And so you don't have control of nature or animals you're working with. So there was a lot of pivots. And the way that Mark and I write, and specifically the way we approached Penelope is we do a lot of improv films and even shows, but with Penelope, we really worked to script it out as far as we could, not being 16-year-old girls ourselves, but I was one once. So we got it as...
And I am one spiritually.
I know.
We know.
I wasn't going to say
We know
it,
that
but...
too.
Everybody knows.
But, we left this, we always leave space. I love leaving space for the actors. So I get it so far, and then there's space on the edges where they fill in themselves. And in that process, working with my lead, Megan, and the other people who I can't name who are in it, they were able to craft and kind of get to the edges and define their characters. And from there, Mark and I are always like pretty quick to pivot, and we were able to kind of make some changes. And again, it's like navigating that this could come back in a season 2 if we get a season 2. So how do we leave this breadcrumb here where it won't feel weird and it works in this episode, but also if I need it later, it's gonna have been laid for season 2 for me to like check back in on it.
Please, season 2. That's all I have to say.
That is the perfect note to end on. Please, season 2 for both of these incredible projects. Thank you so much for sharing your work.
Thank you all for
with us
coming.
at Sundance. Thank you so much for this conversation. Mel, Mark, Keyonna, and Nzingha. Really appreciate you being here.